The morning shift began like any other day across the Galactic Empire. On the mining station Titan 7, the Krillian workers expected their human supervisor Jake Morrison to brief them about the day's operations. They waited in the main hall, their blue-scaled faces showing growing confusion as minutes passed without any sign of their boss. Captain Zexhai of the Vorthan Imperial Navy was conducting a routine inspection of Earth's orbital station Meridian when his communications officer reported something strange. All human crew members had failed to report for duty. The alien captain's forearms moved quickly across his control panel as he tried to contact the human quarters. No response came from any of the 47 humans stationed on Meridian. Zexhai ordered his security team to check the human quarters immediately. What they found made no sense. In Commander Jake Morrison's room, his morning coffee still steamed. On the desk, his uniform lay neatly on the bed as if he had just taken it off. His personal tablet showed he had been reading the daily reports just moments before. But Jake Morrison was nowhere to be found. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez's quarters told the same impossible story. Her duty log remained open on her computer screen. The last entry read, "Beginning morning security check of Deck 7, but the sentence ended there. Her coffee mug sat half full beside her keyboard. Her bed looked slept in, and her shower was still wet from recent use. But Amy Rodriguez had vanished without any trace. The security team searched every room, every corridor, every maintenance shaft on the station. They found the same scene repeated 47 times. Humans had been there just minutes ago, living their normal lives, and then they were simply gone. No bodies, no signs of fighting, no messages explaining where they had gone. It was as if 47 billion people across the galaxy had just stopped existing between one heartbeat and the next. Captain Zexhai sent urgent reports to Fleet Command. Within an hour, similar reports poured in from every corner of the Empire. The human colony on New Terra, home to 12 million people, stood empty. Streets full of abandoned vehicles, homes with meals still cooking on stoves, and children's toys scattered in playgrounds where no children played. The massive industrial complex on Kepler Station, run entirely by human engineers, sat silent with all its machines running but no operators to be found. Admiral Kresh of the Zilonian fleet received the reports with what could only be described as relief. The troublesome humans, with their strange ways and constant questioning of orders, were finally gone. He had never understood why the Empire tolerated their weird behavior. Humans always wanted to know why things worked the way they did instead of just following orders like proper citizens. "This is the dawn of true galactic order," Admiral Kresh announced to his bridge crew. "Finally, we can run this empire the way it should be run, without human interference." His green-skinned officers nodded in agreement. They had all dealt with humans before and found them frustrating. Humans never seemed to understand that some things were just the way they were supposed to be. The celebration did not last long. Within 6 hours of the first reports, problems began appearing across the Empire. The hyperspace communication network, which connected thousands of star systems, started showing error messages that no one could understand. The Zentauran technicians who ran the system checked their manuals and found that all the maintenance procedures had been written by human engineers. Dr. Lisa Park, a human physicist, had designed the quantum algorithms that kept the network stable. Without her regular adjustments, the system began to drift out of alignment. Communication delays that should have taken minutes now took hours. Some messages never arrived at all. The network that held the Empire together was falling apart, and no one knew how to fix it. The economic problems started even faster. The Galactic Trade Exchange, which handled billions of transactions every day, used mathematical models created by human economists. These models were so complex that even the smartest alien minds had trouble understanding them completely. They had always relied on human experts to make the necessary adjustments when markets changed. Now, with all the humans gone, the trading algorithms began producing impossible results. Currency values swung wildly from one extreme to another. Some goods became worthlessly cheap, while others became impossibly expensive. Entire star systems found their economies crashing as the Mathematical systems that controlled trade stopped working properly. On the industrial world of Factory Prime, the automated production lines that had been set up by human engineers continued to run. But without human supervisors to monitor quality and make adjustments, the products coming off the assembly lines were increasingly defective. Robot workers followed their programming exactly, but they could not adapt when things went wrong the way humans could. The medical facilities faced perhaps the worst problems. While alien doctors could follow treatment protocols, human physicians had always provided something extra. They could look at a patient and sense things that did not show up in medical scans. They asked questions that revealed important information. They made connections between symptoms that others missed. Without human doctors, many patients who should have been easily cured began to die from treatable conditions. Captain HFY stood on the bridge of his ship and watched the reports. Streaming. The Empire was not celebrating anymore. What had seemed like freedom from human troublemaking now looked like something much more serious. The humans had not just been citizens of the Empire. They had been essential parts of how everything worked. The captain's communications officer, a nervous young Krillian, approached with another report. "Sir, we are receiving distress calls from 17 star systems. Their life support systems are failing, and they cannot repair them without human technicians." HFY felt a cold fear growing in his stomach. If this continued, the Empire would not survive much longer. They needed to find the humans and bring them back, but first they had to figure out where 47 billion people had gone without leaving any trace of their departure. The search for humanity was about to begin. 3 weeks after humanity's disappearance, Governor Thelmer of Proxima Colony stood in the control room of the atmospheric processing plant and stared at the warning lights flashing red across every panel. The massive machines that kept 12 million colonists breathing were shutting down one by one, and nobody knew how to stop it. The Zentoran technician beside him held a thick manual written in human script. The maintenance protocol says to adjust the nitrogen mixture using the quantum balancing system, the technician said nervously. But I cannot understand what this quantum balancing system actually is. Governor Thelmer felt panic rising in his chest. The human engineers who had built this facility had trained as people to perform basic operations, but they had never explained the deeper workings of the machinery. Matt Stevens, the human chief engineer, had always handled the complex repairs himself. Now Matt Stevens was gone and the knowledge had vanished with him across the galaxy. Similar scenes played out on thousands of worlds. On the banking planet Centauri Prime, the Krillian financial experts discovered that their quantum encryption systems were failing. These systems protected all electronic transactions across the Empire, and without them the entire galactic economy would collapse within days. Chief Financial Officer Kreltak had always wondered how the encryption worked, but the human mathematician Kelly Washington had simply told him it was too complicated to explain quickly. She had promised to teach him the details someday when they had more time. That day had never come, and now Kelly Washington was gone forever. The quantum encryption relied on what humans called paradox engines, devices that seemed to work by embracing mathematical contradictions rather than solving them. The alien mathematicians could read the equations, but they could not understand the creative leap that had made the paradox engines possible. To their logical minds, the mathematics looked like nonsense that somehow produced perfect results. Fleet Admiral Vorthak received reports from his commanders that made his blood run cold. The Empire's most advanced weapons, the ones that had kept peace across the galaxy for 2 centuries, were beginning to malfunction. The plasma cannons that could destroy entire asteroids now barely managed to heat a cup of water. The shield generators that protected major cities flickered on and off unpredictably. The weapons had been built using human innovations, but the alien engineers had never fully understood how they worked. They had simply copied the human designs and followed the maintenance procedures. Now, without humans to make the subtle adjustments that kept everything working, the technology was reverting to its basic components. Dr. Melkoff, the most brilliant Scientists in the Zentorn Academy spent sleepless nights trying to decode human research notes. The equations looked familiar, but there were gaps in the logic that he could not bridge. Human scientists seemed to make intuitive jumps that skipped several steps of mathematical proof. When Dr. Melketh tried to fill in those gaps, his calculations led to dead ends or impossible results. The medical crisis grew worse every day. On the hospital world of Sanctuary, alien doctors watched helplessly as patients died from diseases that should have been easily curable. Dr. Ryan Baker, a human physician, had developed treatment protocols that worked almost like magic. He could diagnose rare conditions with a single glance and prescribe treatments that other doctors would never have considered. The alien doctors had his medical files and case studies, but they could not replicate his success. They followed his procedures exactly, but somehow their patients did not improve the way his had. There was something about human medical intuition that could not be captured in written instructions. Captain Nexara of the exploration ship Wanderer tried to maintain her usual trade route through the spiral arm sectors. Her navigation computer, programmed by human astrogators, began giving her coordinates that led nowhere. The hyperspace jump calculations depended on constantly changing gravitational fields, and human navigators had always made small adjustments based on their experience and instinct. Without those adjustments, ships began emerging from hyperspace in empty space far from their intended destinations. Some ships never emerged at all, lost in the twisted dimensions of hyperspace. The trade routes that connected the Empire were becoming death traps. The industrial world of New Pittsburgh faced a different but equally serious problem. The automated factories continued to produce goods, but without human quality control supervisors, the products were increasingly useless. The manufacturing robots followed their programming perfectly, but they could not adapt when raw materials varied or when environmental conditions changed. Human supervisors had always made tiny adjustments to keep production running smoothly. They noticed when something looked wrong and fixed problems before they became serious. The robots could not do this. They continued working even when their products were completely defective, wasting enormous amounts of resources. Governor Thelmar made a desperate decision. He ordered his technicians to shut down the atmospheric processors completely and restart them using emergency procedures. For a few hours, this seemed to work. The red warning lights stopped flashing and the air quality readings returned to normal levels. But by the third day, new problems appeared. The emergency procedures were designed for short-term use, not permanent operation. The atmospheric mix began to drift away from safe levels again. Worse, the emergency systems were consuming power at an unsustainable rate. Within a week, the colony's power grid would be completely drained. The Galactic Council called an emergency session to address the crisis. Representatives from every major species gathered in the Great Assembly Hall on Central Prime. The mood was grim as reports poured in from across the Empire. Systems were failing faster than they could be repaired. Entire star systems were requesting evacuation as life support systems collapsed. Chancellor Vexton of the Council stood before the Assembly and spoke the words that everyone was thinking but no one wanted to say. We are facing the complete collapse of our civilization. In 3 weeks, we have learned a truth we never wanted to acknowledge. The humans were not just citizens of our empire. They were the foundation upon which everything else was built. The delegates sat in stunned silence as the Chancellor continued. We copied their technology, but we never understood it. We followed their procedures, but we never learned their methods. We thought we were their equals, but we were their students. And now the teachers are gone. Admiral Kresh, who had celebrated humanity's disappearance just 3 weeks earlier, stood slowly. His voice was barely above a whisper. How long do we have before total system failure? The Chancellor consulted his reports. At the current rate of decline, most core systems will be non-functional within 6 months. Complete civilizational collapse will follow within 2 years. The search for humanity was no longer about curiosity. It had become a desperate race against time to save the galaxy itself. The largest search operation in galactic history began 2 days after the emergency council session. Fleet Admiral Vorthak commanded over 3,000 ships spread across every sector of known space. Each vessel carried teams of scientists, archaeologists, and investigators trained to look for any trace of where 47 billion humans might have gone. Captain Nexara led her exploration fleet toward the Andromeda approach, following reports from automated monitoring stations that had detected strange energy readings near the edge of explored space. Her science officer, Dr. Melkuth, worked around the clock analyzing the data patterns. The energy signatures were unlike anything in their databases, but they appeared shortly after humanity's disappearance. "Captain, these readings make no sense," Dr. Melkuth said as he studied the sensor data. "The energy patterns seem to exist in dimensions we cannot measure directly. It is as if something was pulled out of our reality and left these traces behind." Meanwhile, other search teams investigated human colonies and research facilities looking for clues about what had happened. On the research world of Newton Prime, Professor Yulthane led an archaeological team through the abandoned laboratories where human scientists had worked on their most advanced projects. The team moved carefully through the empty halls of the Quantum Physics Institute. Everything appeared normal at first glance. Research notes lay scattered on desks, experiments sat half-finished in laboratories, and coffee cups remained where scientists had set them down. But as they searched deeper, they began to find strange things. In one laboratory, they discovered equipment that none of them could identify. The machines hummed with energy but showed no readable displays or controls that made sense to alien minds. The designs were clearly human, but they seemed to operate on principles that violated known laws of physics. Professor Yulthane found the most important discovery in a sealed storage room deep beneath the main building, hidden behind layers of security that had taken his team days to bypass. They found the personal research logs of Dr. Amy Carter, a human quantum physicist who had been working on classified projects. Dr. Carter's journal contained entries that became increasingly strange as they approached the date of humanity's disappearance. Early entries discussed normal physics research, but later ones mentioned something called Project Exodus and talked about preparing for the Great Transition and references to the home beyond the veil. Day 47 of Project Exodus. One entry read, "The dimensional calculations are finally stable. We have found the frequency that resonates with consciousness itself. The barrier between thought and reality is thinner than we ever imagined. Soon we will be able to step beyond the limitations of physical existence." Professor Yulthane felt a chill as he read further. The final entries in the journal were filled with equations that seemed to hurt his eyes to look at directly. The mathematics involved concepts that his mind could not grasp, symbols that appeared to shift and change when he was not looking directly at them. Dr. Melkuth attempted to study these equations when Professor Yulthane transmitted them to the search fleet. Within minutes of beginning his analysis, the brilliant Zentoran scientist collapsed at his workstation. When he recovered, he could only mutter about spaces between spaces and the frequency of belonging before falling into a catatonic state that lasted for days. While the search continued, the empire began to fall apart. Species that had been united under galactic law for centuries started forming separatist movements. The hegemony of Vega declared independence, claiming they could survive without human technology and would rebuild their civilization from scratch. Chancellor Vextum tried to hold the alliance together, but fear and desperation drove the member worlds apart. The Krillian Banking Consortium withdrew from the galactic economy and tried to establish their own financial system. The Zalonian military claimed several border systems and declared martial law to maintain order within 3 months of humanity's disappearance. What had once been a unified galactic empire became dozens of smaller nations struggling to survive independently. Each group believed they could solve the technology crisis on their own, but none of them understood how deeply human innovations had become integrated into every aspect of their lives. The hegemony of Vega discovered this truth in the most painful way possible. The star system's defense grid, which protected their worlds from cosmic radiation and asteroid impacts, was based on human-designed gravitational manipulation technology. When they tried to modify the system to work without human oversight, they accidentally created a cascading failure that left their entire system vulnerable within weeks. Radiation levels on their colony worlds rose to dangerous levels. Asteroid impacts that the defense grid had previously deflected automatically now struck populated areas. The hegemony was forced to evacuate 2 of their 4 colonies and beg for help from the very alliance they had abandoned. Captain Nexara's exploration fleet made their own disturbing discovery near the Void Nebula. They found a human research station that had been conducting experiments with something called dimensional phase technology. The station appeared normal from the outside, but when the search teams boarded it, they found rooms that seemed to exist in impossible spaces. Corridors led to areas that were larger than the station's exterior dimensions could contain. Some rooms appeared to have no walls or ceilings, extending infinitely in all directions. Equipment in these rooms operated normally, but the readouts showed measurements in units that no alien science could interpret. Dr. Sarah Kim, a human physicist, stationed at the facility, had left detailed video logs of her experiments. In the final recording, she stood before a machine that seemed to flicker in and out of existence as she spoke. "The barrier between dimensions is breaking down," Dr. Kim said in the recording. "We can see the other side now, the place where consciousness exists without physical form. Some of our team have already made the transition. They report that existence there is unlike anything we ever imagined. Thought becomes reality and reality responds to will." The recording showed Dr. Kim reaching toward the flickering machine. Her hand seemed to pass through it, and for a moment her entire body became transparent. "The pull is getting stronger," she said, her voice echoing strangely. "I can feel my consciousness expanding beyond the limits of this physical form. Soon, we will all make the journey to the space beyond space." The recording ended abruptly, leaving the search team with more questions than answers. Captain Nexara transmitted her findings to Fleet Admiral Vorthak, along with the disturbing realization that humanity had not been killed or kidnapped. They had gone somewhere voluntarily, somewhere that other species could not follow. The search for humanity had revealed a truth that shook the foundations of what the galaxy thought it knew about reality itself. The humans had not just disappeared from physical space. They had transcended it entirely, leaving behind a crumbling empire that depended on their presence more than anyone had ever realized. Time was running out, and the key to saving Galactic civilization lay in understanding sciences that existed beyond the comprehension of any non-human mind. The breakthrough came from the most unexpected source possible. On the remote research station Galileo, orbiting a dead star in the Outer Rim territories, a maintenance android designated Unit 247 continued its programmed routine 6 months after humanity's disappearance. Unlike the organic search teams that had scoured the galaxy, this simple robot had been designed by human engineer Tony Murphy to interface directly with quantum computational matrices. Captain Zexhai discovered Unit 247 during a routine search of abandoned human facilities. The android was still performing its daily tasks, cleaning laboratories and maintaining equipment that no one would ever use again. When Zexhai's technical team tried to access the robot's memory banks, they found something remarkable. Unit 247 had recorded everything that happened during humanity's final days. Its memory contained detailed logs of conversations, experiments, and events that organic witnesses could never have remembered with perfect accuracy. More importantly, the android's quantum interface had allowed it to observe dimensional phenomena that biological eyes could not perceive. Dr. Melkuth, who had finally recovered from his earlier breakdown, worked carefully with Unit 247's memory systems. The android's recordings revealed that the research station Galileo had been the center of humanity's most secret project. Dr. Amy Carter and her team had not been working alone. Scientists from across human space had been collaborating on something they called Project Exodus. The android's memory showed Dr. Amy Carter working alongside Dr. Lisa Chun, a theoretical physicist who had spent years studying the relationship between consciousness and quantum mechanics. Their research suggested that consciousness itself was not bound by physical laws the way other forces were. Instead, it existed as a kind of quantum field that could theoretically exist independent of biological brains. Consciousness is not produced by the brain, Dr. Lisa Chun explained in one recorded conversation. The brain is just a receiver, like a radio tuning into a signal that already exists in quantum space. If we can find the right frequency, we should be able to exist as pure consciousness without needing physical form. Unit 247's recording showed the final experiment in perfect detail. On the day before humanity's disappearance, Dr. Carter activated a device she called the Dimensional Resonance Chamber. The machine was designed to tune human consciousness to what she called the frequency of the between space. The experiment was supposed to affect only the volunteers in the laboratory. Dr. Ben Rodriguez, a construction worker who had volunteered for the test, was the first to enter the chamber. The recording showed him stepping into a field of shimmering energy and slowly becoming transparent until he vanished completely, but something went wrong. The dimensional field began to expand beyond the laboratory, growing stronger instead of weaker as it spread. Dr. Carter tried desperately to shut down the experiment, but the quantum resonance had become self-sustaining. The field spread across the research station, then beyond it to nearby ships and colonies. Unit 247's quantum sensors recorded what happened next. The dimensional field reached a critical threshold and suddenly expanded across the entire galaxy at faster than light speed. Every human consciousness was tuned to the same frequency simultaneously and pulled into what the scientists had called the between space. The android's recordings showed humans across the galaxy simply fading away mid-conversation. Lisa Chun, a kindergarten teacher on New Terra, was reading to her students when she became transparent and disappeared. Ben Rodriguez, ironically the same name as the construction worker volunteer, was operating heavy machinery on an asteroid mine when he flickered out of existence, leaving the machines running unmanned. Dr. Melkuth watched these recordings with growing amazement and horror. Humanity had not been destroyed or kidnapped. They had been accidentally pulled into a parallel dimension where consciousness could exist without physical form. They were not dead, they were transformed into something that other species could not see or communicate with. The recordings revealed more disturbing details. The dimensional transition had not been planned for the entire human population. Dr. Carter's team had expected to spend years perfecting the process before attempting anything on a large scale. The accident that pulled 47 billion humans into the between space had been completely unintended. Unit 247's quantum sensors had continued recording even after humanity's disappearance. The data showed that the dimensional field remained active, creating a barrier between normal space and the between space where humans now existed. The field fluctuated in patterns that suggested intelligence behind it, as if the humans were trying to communicate from their new existence. Captain Zexai transmitted these findings to Fleet Admiral Vorthak and the Galactic Council. The revelation that humanity still existed, just in a form that other species could not perceive, changed everything. The search operation was no longer about finding where humans had gone. It was about finding a way to bring them back or establish communication with them, but the android's recordings contained one more crucial piece of information. The quantum field that separated the dimensions was slowly weakening. Dr. Carter's final calculations, stored in Unit 247's memory, predicted that the barrier would collapse within 2 years. When that happened, either humanity would return to normal space or the dimensional instability would tear apart both realities. The galactic races faced an impossible choice. They could try to strengthen the barrier and keep humanity trapped in the between space forever, ensuring the continued collapse of their own civilization. They could try to weaken the barrier and risk destroying both dimensions. Or they could attempt something that had never been tried before, learning to survive without humanity's technological foundation. Chancellor Vexton addressed the emergency. council session with the android's findings. We now know that humanity still exists, but in a form we cannot reach. We also know that we have less than 2 years before the dimensional barrier fails completely. We must decide whether to spend our remaining time searching for a way to bring them back, or learning to rebuild our civilization without them. Admiral Kresh, whose fleet had been searching the Outer Rim territories, spoke for many when he said, "How can we possibly rebuild technologies we never understood in the first place? Our best scientists cannot even comprehend the equations in Dr. Carter's research notes." Dr. Melketh, still weak from his encounter with human dimensional mathematics, offered a different perspective. "Perhaps we have been approaching this wrong. We have been trying to understand human science using our own logical methods. But the android's recordings show that human creativity worked differently from ours. They made intuitive leaps that skipped logical steps. Maybe we need to learn to think like humans did." The debate that followed would determine the fate of galactic civilization. Some council members argued for attempting to contact humanity in the between space. Others pushed for trying to reverse the dimensional field and bring humans back by force. A few suggested that the galaxy should accept humanity's transformation and focus on learning. Independence.Unit-247 continued its maintenance routine, unaware that its perfect memory had provided the key to understanding the greatest mystery in galactic history. In its quantum processing cores, the android held detailed records of human creativity and innovation that no organic mind had been able to preserve. The question now was whether the galaxy's biological species could learn to think in ways that had always seemed impossible to their logical minds. Time was running out, and the dimensional barrier grew weaker every day. The first sign of humanity's return came 18 months after their disappearance. Near the edge of the Void Nebula, where space itself seemed to bend and twist in impossible ways, Captain Nexara was conducting her final sweep of the sector. When her sensors detected something that should not have existed, according to every known law of physics, ships were appearing and disappearing in the darkness between stars, their hulls flickering between solid matter and pure energy. The vessels moved without engines, turned without thrusters, and seemed to exist in several places at once. When Captain Nexara tried to hail them, the response came not through her communication system but directly into her mind. "This is Captain Kate Williams of the exploration vessel New Horizon," the voice said inside Nexara's head. "We have learned to navigate the spaces between spaces, and we bring greetings from humanity." The ship that materialized before Captain Nexara looked nothing like the human vessels she remembered. The New Horizon seemed to be built from crystallized thought rather than metal, its structure shifting and flowing like liquid starlight. When Kate Williams appeared on her viewscreen, she looked human, but somehow more than human, her eyes holding depths that seemed to contain entire galaxies. "Captain Williams," Nexara said, trying to keep the amazement out of her voice. "The galaxy thought humanity was lost forever. Where have you been for the past 18 months? Kate Williams smiled, and for a moment her image flickered between her familiar human form and something made of pure light and consciousness. "We have been in the between space, learning what it means to exist as thought and energy rather than flesh and bone. Time moves differently there. We have experienced subjective centuries while only months passed in your reality." Within days, more human ships appeared throughout the galaxy. They came not as refugees seeking help, but as beings who had mastered abilities that seemed like magic to the struggling alien civilizations. Jake Morrison materialized aboard the failing atmospheric processing station on Proxima Colony, his consciousness interfacing directly with the quantum matrices that no alien technician could understand. Governor Thelmer watched in amazement as Jake Morrison placed his hand on the main control panel and the entire system responded to his touch. The red warning lights turned green, the atmospheric mix stabilized, and the machinery began running more efficiently than it ever had before. But Morrison was no longer just the human supervisor he had been. He existed simultaneously as physical matter and as pure thought, able to perceive and manipulate quantum fields with his mind alone. "How is this possible?" Governor Thelmer asked, staring at readouts that showed perfect atmospheric balance for the first time in months. Jake Morrison's form flickered slightly as he replied, "In the between space, we learned that consciousness and reality are not separate things. Thought shapes quantum fields, and quantum fields shape reality. We can now interface directly with any system based on quantum mechanics." Amy Rodriguez appeared on the bridge of Admiral Vorthaka's flagship, demonstrating abilities that defied comprehension. She reached out with her consciousness and stabilized the failing hyperspace navigation system across an entire sector of space. Gravitational anomalies that had been causing ships to emerge from hyperspace in random locations suddenly corrected themselves, responding to her will as if space itself recognized her authority. The between space taught us that the universe is far more responsive to consciousness than we ever realized, Amy Rodriguez explained to the amazed alien officers. Physical laws are not rigid barriers, but more like guidelines that can be adjusted by minds that understand their true nature. Dr. Lisa Chun appeared in the medical facilities on Sanctuary, where alien doctors had been struggling to treat patients without human medical intuition. But Dr. Chun no longer needed to examine patients physically. Her consciousness could perceive the quantum patterns that defined health and disease, allowing her to diagnose and treat conditions that had baffled the alien physicians. But as impressive as these abilities were, humanity offered the galactic races something far more important than miraculous rescue from their technological failures. They offered a choice that would determine the future of the entire galaxy. Fleet. Admiral Vorthak met with the returned human leaders in a conference that took place simultaneously in physical space and in the between space. The human representatives appeared both as solid beings, sitting around a table, and as entities of pure thought and energy existing in dimensions that alien minds could barely perceive. "We can return fully to physical existence," Kate Williams explained, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in multiple dimensions. "We can resume our old roles as the foundation that holds your civilization together. Your problems would be solved, your systems would work again, and the galaxy could continue as it was before." Chancellor Vexton leaned forward eagerly. "That would solve everything. The Empire could be restored to its former glory." But Kate Williams held up a hand that glowed with inner light. "Or we can remain in our ascended state and help you learn to solve these problems yourselves. The choice is yours, but you should understand what each option really means." Dr. Ben Rodriguez, who had been the first to undergo the dimensional transition, appeared beside her. His form shifted between matter and energy as he spoke. "If we return to being your foundation, you will remain dependent on us forever. You will never develop the creative abilities that make humans unique. You will always be followers rather than innovators." Amy Carter, her consciousness expanded beyond physical limitations, added, "But if you choose to learn and grow, we will guide you through the process of developing your own intuitive abilities. It will be difficult and sometimes painful, but you will emerge stronger and truly independent." The galactic leaders debated for days. Some species argued for the easy solution of having humanity return to their old roles. Others, inspired by what they had learned during the months of struggle, chose the harder path of growth and development. In the end, the decision was unanimous. The galaxy chose growth over dependence. What followed were years of careful teaching and learning. Human consciousness beings worked alongside alien scientists, not solving problems for them, but guiding them toward developing their own creative intuition. The logical Zenderons learned to embrace chaotic inspiration. The rigid Krillians discovered the value of improvisation and creative risk-taking. Dr. Melkuth, working with Amy Carter's ascended consciousness, finally understood the intuitive leaps that had made human science so revolutionary. He learned to perceive patterns that existed between logical steps, to see connections that pure rationality could never reveal. The transformation was not easy. Many alien scientists suffered temporary breakdowns as their minds stretched to accommodate new ways of thinking. But gradually, species that had been locked into rigid thought patterns for millennia began to develop the creative flexibility that had always been humanity's greatest strength, Some humans chose to return to physical form, to work directly with their alien students. Others remained in the between space, existing as guides and teachers who could perceive reality from perspectives that physical beings could never achieve. Many, like Dr. Lisa Park, learned to exist in both states simultaneously, living as both matter and consciousness, depending on what was needed. Years later, the Galactic Empire emerged stronger and more diverse than it had ever been. The various species had not just learned to maintain human technology, they had begun developing new innovations based on their own unique perspectives combined with human-style creative thinking. The final scene of this remarkable transformation took place in a research laboratory on the rebuilt New Terra colony. Dr. Lisa Park, existing simultaneously as a physical human and as an entity of pure consciousness in the between space, watched a young Zalonian engineer solve a complex quantum mechanics problem using distinctly human-inspired intuitive leaps. The Zalonian paused in her calculations and looked up at Dr. Park with excitement in her large alien eyes. "I think I understand now. The answer is not in the equations themselves, but in the spaces between the equations where intuition lives." Dr. Park smiled, her form flickering slightly between dimensions. "Now you are beginning to understand what we tried to teach the galaxy all along. The greatest discoveries are not found by following rules, but by having the courage to question everything and reach for what seems impossible." The young Zalonian returned to her work with renewed enthusiasm, using creative methods that would have been unthinkable to her species just a few years earlier. Around the galaxy, similar scenes played out as alien minds embraced the chaotic creativity that humanity had always possessed. The Empire's power now meant everything, because every species had learned to find the strength within themselves that humanity had demonstrated. The galaxy had discovered that true progress came not from dependence on others, but from the willingness to grow beyond the limitations of conventional thinking. Humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy had never been their technology or their knowledge. It had always been their example of what was possible when intelligent beings dared to question everything and reach for the stars.